Prime Minister has announced that the eligibility rules for the Canada Emergency Business Account are now being relaxed. Businesses with a payroll of $20,000 to $1.5 million will now be eligible. The previous thresholds required a payroll of $50,000 to $1 million. And he said another program is coming soon to help small businesses pay their rent from now until June, but that still has to be worked out with the provinces. On the crisis and the tragedy ongoing in long-term care homes in this country, he's promising action after talking with the premiers tonight and offering federal funding to boost wages for those essential workers in those facilities. He also noted he's received a demand from Quebec to have the federal government provide medical help, including doctors in the Canadian military, to provide help in Quebec in those long-term care facilities there. Now, we also know Quebec's expressed interest in that pool of workers with healthcare expertise who've signed up at a federal website to offer their services, some 1,000 of them who say they can work in Quebec. They're bilingual. Quebec expressed great interest in that pool of expertise during the briefing yesterday, and I expect we'll hear more from the Quebec Premier today about his demands for Ottawa and how he hopes Ottawa can help. A couple of other quick things to cover. On the recall of Parliament scheduled for Monday, he says a deal is close to being arranged, an arrangement that doesn't see 338 MPs return to Parliament Hill on Monday. And he repeated a familiar message. We won't be reopening the economy anytime soon. It will be many weeks and not until there's a plan to respond quickly with testing and tracing after the first wave of COVID-19 to prevent a second wave. And on the reaction to Donald Trump suggesting that he'd like to see the border reopen sooner rather than later, Justin Trudeau says, again, it will be many weeks before we can talk about easing restrictions at the border. Lots to unpack here, and let's start with my next guest, Dan Kelly, the president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, joins me from Toronto. Dan Kelly, good to talk to you again. You had been pushing for some of these changes in eligibility to this bank and credit program that the federal government had unveiled. You've heard the new parameters today. Are you happy?
It's major progress. Really good news to hear that there is going to be some relief on commercial rent, the second largest expense for most small businesses. And on CEBA, the Canada Emergency Business Account, big progress there too. Lowering that bottom threshold from 50,000 to 20,000 will mean that a whole bunch of additional small firms that were cut out of access for this year will now have access to that. And that's a pretty significant move. It isn't all the way. Of course, we've been hearing from a lot of micro-sized businesses and those that pay with dividends in their business that they're not going to be able to they're not going to be eligible for the program. And that $20,000 floor for many of them is still not going to be low enough. But it will give access to thousands and thousands of additional small firms, and that is good news.
How many more people do you think? How many more firms will benefit from this, and what difference will it make to those firms?
You know, what we like best about the CEBA program is that there is a $10,000 forgivable portion of the loan. And in fact, what we've discovered along the way is that, you know, for many firms, they're worried about taking on additional debt. CEBA will allow them not to have to do that. You could actually take out the $40,000 loan and just use that $10,000 federal money, that forgivable portion, and then repay the loan as early as possible, early next year. Keeping that $10,000 to help pay some of your fixed costs. So it is a good measure, and we're encouraging small businesses to use it. I think it'll probably split the difference for about half. I would imagine that will be tens of thousands of additional small businesses that will gain access to it. But there are a lot of self-employed people and even really small shops. You know, the reason we call them mom and pop shops is because it literally is family in the business. And they are unlikely to be helped by this because they may not pay any salaries. They may just pay dividends to their family members in the business.
Right. We may. I think we'll get more details because I know the finance minister is coming up at this briefing over in the next 15 minutes or so, Dan. So probably more details about this. And I guess what do you want to see from the rent help? The Prime Minister hinted it's coming. I think one of the things you'd suggested is that the businesses be told, look, you can use that $10,000 forgivable portion of the business grant and use that to pay your rent. Do you think that's where they're headed?
No, it appears that the government is creating a brand new program, one that they'll be working on with the provincial governments. Our understanding is that this is actually going to support landlords and allow them then to pass on lower rent or defer or eliminate rent for small business tenants. We're not sure about the mechanics of that, and it does sound like from the Prime Minister's comments that it is going to require provincial governments to come on board. That makes sense to us. Provinces have actually been quite slow. You'll be surprised to hear me say this, but the federal government has been doing more in terms of economic relief measures to small business owners than provincial governments, even though the provinces have been the ones to order the small businesses to shut down to prevent the spread.
Right.
So we need provincial governments to step to the table.
So does that work for you then? If this benefit to help businesses deal with their commercial rents, if it flows to the tenant, not the business, does that still work for you? Or sorry, the landlord.
We would prefer
it flows to
if
the
it
landlord.
goes to the land. Yeah. It remains to be seen. I have no details of how the program is going to work. But this is the first major step towards commercial rent relief in Canada. There are small programs in Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia, but that's it. And if the federal government's move can then be supplemented by provincial government action, we may then have meaningful support for our members passed on through the landlords. Obviously, a direct transfer to the business to pay their bills would be better. But right now, small businesses are absolutely freaked out about how they're going to meet May rent. Many of them have not paid April, and just deferring that is going to be like an anchor around their necks when they reopen. If you've just got a trickle of income coming in and these giant bills that are facing you, that's when you're going to go bankrupt.
Okay, let's finish on this. As you would expect, well, I guess I shouldn't say as you would expect because no one's ever done this, but as we go through this pandemic, but I suppose we could expect in the course of a crisis that at some point the conversation turns to, okay, what do we do on the other side of this? And now we're hearing from different business organizations. We heard from the Prime Minister again today, look, this is going to be weeks. When we reopen, it has to be done slowly. It has to be done in the context of expecting another wave and being prepared for that wave with testing and mitigation efforts ready to go as soon as it happens. Where are you on how quickly this needs to happen when it happens?
Well, look, we've got to take the advice of our medical officers of health. I totally get and respect that. But we are watching closely what's happening in Europe, and many countries that have had huge waves of this, including Spain and Germany, are now beginning to reopen. Chancellor Merkel just announced today that very small shops are going to be able to open as of May the 4th. I think there are some lessons that we've learned now from the grocery and pharmacy settings in terms of limiting numbers that can come into your store, putting up protective barriers. And it seems like we should be able to have some small retailers that only see a handful of customers a day to open their doors to small numbers with protective measures in place, as we've been doing with grocery and pharmacies. I've got lots of members that are pointing out to me on a regular basis that people can go buy their pots and pans and new clothes at Walmart and stand in a big long line. Meanwhile, the very small company that might see 5 customers a day is required to shut down. That's not fair to allow one to sell these other goods outside of grocery while small firms are cut out of that. I think there are some steps, and we're not pushing the government to say lift all the restrictions today. But we do want governments, particularly provinces, to start building plans to allow businesses to reopen safely, to protect their employees, protect their customers too.
Right, and so some of them have already suggested that's what they're working on, and so sometime in the next, I think, couple of weeks, we ought to be able to see how they think we come out the other side of this. Dan Kelly, always great to get your perspective. Thanks again today.
Anytime.